Hi guys, my name is Katie or Kbdoesart, and today's just going to be kind of a super quick video kind of introducing UV editing and unwrapping and texturing and that kind of thing. So I'm not going to be covering like a specific object on like this is how you unwrap this object. I'm just going to be covering some really basic vocabulary and directions that we will kind of use in Maya when we are going through each of the individual objects. Since that will be kind of my new series of videos, we'll be unwrapping objects that I've made in Maya and then transferring them over into Substance Painter and texturing them. So I think for this, we can just use a cylinder as our basic example. So we'll just, you can grab a cylinder if you want to mess around with me, or if you just need to listen, that works too. So let's say this is our object, it's all done. The first thing you always want to do when you're about to unwrap an object is just to delete your history, which you can find by edit, delete all by type, and do your history. This generally just kind of like clears your cache a little bit, makes it a little bit easier on Maya to unwrap your object. So I'm already in the UV editing tool space, but you can go ahead and change to that. And we're going to be primarily using what we call the UV editor. So since we've got a really basic cylinder, it's already actually cut it out really nicely for us. So these are what you can consider UV shells. So they're kind of like these pieces that have been cut up by our cut and sew lines here. That white line right there is basically just like a line that is separating out our UV shells. So those are a couple things that you want to try and recognize, is just these are our blocks that these lines are cutting up. A good way to think of UVs is kind of like wrapping that goes around an object. So you're going to want to cut up your object in the easiest way possible to understand how you should texture. So usually that's just distinguishing really clear faces. So you want to, obviously for like a cylinder, you want to take the top and the bottom face because that clearly identifies plane changes. And then same with this like barrel type cylinder that it makes here. It just becomes an easy rectangle when we're able to cut it down the middle like that. So normally when we're unwrapping an object, you'll want to go into UVs and you'll just like select all your UVs. And then often what you'll do is you'll create one of these projections. So sometimes you can do automatic and it works out okay. That's kind of what we have here. Other times you can do cylindrical, depending on what object you have, and it'll give you kind of a nice cylindrical like that. It kind of depends on the type of object, so we'll go a little bit more into depth when we have specific objects. But for the most part, you just want to be aware that like this is kind of like the first projection of what your UVs will look like. The next thing we want to kind of go over is if you go up here to UV, you can grab the 3D cut and sew tool. This is really cool because it literally allows you to cut and sew new lines. So whenever we're kind of making an object, we'll go through and pick which lines we want to cut and which ones we don't want to cut. So you can select lines by clicking them or double clicking them sometimes. And if you don't want that line anymore, you can click Control and unclick the line so that it no longer is cutting there. There we go. You can also hold Shift and double click on lines to like select longer. Or you can hold Control and double click lines to unselect. So clearly you can see why we want to have this top face isolated, because this is what it looks like when it's not isolated. So definitely want to make sure you have those kinds of clear cut patterns. So when you're using the 3D cut and sew tool, when you want to switch out, make sure you press Q for select and then select UVs. So something that's kind of cool is if you select this object and then you do create automatic, it actually will generally cut it pretty well for you, which is kind of cool. They also have these really cool faces here to kind of like show the direction that it is on the UV editor here. So last couple things that we'll want to go over is under modify, you'll see the layout. when you click on that, it should arrange your UVs in like the best possible way. So that'll generally be what we will use for that. And then there's some other tools in here that we will use a bit. The unfold is another one that we will use. The last thing that we'll probably want to check out is the UV snapshot. So if you click on this, it should pull up this little window where basically this is gonna become an image. And so we can then take that image into like Photoshop or some other types of programs where you can actually like draw on top of your images. And then you can plug back in your texture files from Photoshop or other JPEGs. And that's kind of like a simple way to texture something, especially if you're using like images to texture. Using that kind of thing is definitely the easiest way to do it. So we can kind of go over that kind of aspect of things. I don't usually do it this way because I just export my models into Substance Painter. And so you don't actually need to do this for Substance Painter because it's literally taking your UVs and your object into Substance. But if you were going to texture in Photoshop, this is the way that you would want to do it. Alright, so I think that was kind of all of the basic points that I wanted to quickly mention about UV layouts and unwrapping objects in Maya. When I go into each of these individual objects, I will obviously specify exactly what I'm doing and exactly how we want to cut up the object to make it as easy as possible, at least for as far as my knowledge ends. So yeah, if you guys have any questions about UVs or anything, my knowledge is slightly limited, but I love to research and learn new stuff with you. So please feel free to comment or reach out to me, and I will see you guys next time for when we are texturing some objects. Bye guys!